common trends and issues that we found. So I know that you mentioned that you have a company that actually does gap analysis currently. So what kind of trends have you seen so far as when your company's doing gap analysis?
You know, I've been so mired in, and thankfully I have partners who are running the companies because, you know, by the way, guys, we're supposed to be volunteers, so I've been volunteering like triple full time since January, which means my other companies are kind of doing things on their own, and I've always been really kind of a silent partner anyway, so I have time for that. That's a question for our cyber company CEO. Um, and but I would say that based on what I remember from a long time ago, last year, before my life was sucked up by CMMC, the most gap analyses usually will find, it's kind of like this, the common thread between this certain level of organizations. And usually, we mainly work with financial and medical firms. So it's really more HIPAA compliance and financial regulation compliance and so forth. So it's really not CMMC, and they can't do CMMC right now because of conflict of interest. So I need to stay out of CMMC at this point at least. And my companies do. But really, it's almost the same thing. So I'm going to kind of throw that back to you. In fact.
Yeah. So we've been doing SecureStrux ourselves, and I'm just going to talk about SecureStrux and my experience real quick. So SecureStrux has been doing gap analysis as far as CUI and 800.171 for about 4 years now. And we've done quite a few CMMC gap analysis. And I think that, honestly, if you would have asked me this question before I started doing this, I probably would have said stuff like, multi-factor authentication and some other things. But to be honest with you, that's not the trend at all. There's so many technical implementations for multi-factor authentication that most organizations are doing that, and it's kind of a requirement. It's different than it was 4 or 5 years ago, where that was a big deal that you had multi-factor authentication. But that's definitely not a trend. I think the biggest trend is the simple fact that people don't have documentation and policies and procedures that match the technical implementation. To be honest with you, most of the gap analysis that I've done so far, there's very little documentation at all. So a lot of times they have a good technical implementation, but they don't have a documented process of how they're doing it. So I think that's probably the biggest trend. But and then those other things that are kind of hard to do unless you have a documented process, like fully managing incident response, having those playbooks on how to actually manage an incident, and then change management and configuration management are the other trends that we see. People just don't have, without a documented process, it's really hard to manage change and documenting change in your environment. So those are some of the big trends, and I'm sure you see the same thing, in the healthcare and financial world.
Yeah,
As well.
and look, what is CMMC going to do? What is the effect, the true effect of CMMC? Because until now, and we got to be honest with ourselves. Again, I'm a DoD contractor, so I'm going to be honest with myself here, right? DoD has tried all kinds of carrots with us, right? Putting it in the contract, being nice about it. Maybe we'll audit you, and if you don't have what you need, then we'll do a POAM and just try to be better next time. It's kind of like there's really no real effect, right? What they're trying to do now is bring out the stakes, right? So what is it really going to do? Well, it's going to start involving many different organizations all of a sudden, not just cybersecurity, within a company. So what we're talking about is obviously sales and marketing, right? I mean, sales, they want their contracts won, and all of a sudden there's a requirement and you don't have it, and we're not going to be able to win the contract. So sales gets involved. Legal is going to get involved. All of a sudden, there's clauses in that contract that they're actually going to read. Obviously, IT and cyber have always been involved, but they may not have been heard as much, right? Now they get a voice at the table. Finance, cybersecurity has always been, so far, in my experience, and I don't want to speak for all of us on this call, there's 206 people here, but in my experience has been an afterthought. So as a result, budgets are not, this cybersecurity does not get as much of a budget. Now, I'm not talking about those of you that are, building weaponry and so forth, but, most of us OSCs who are really small businesses, it's just an afterthought. So it doesn't end up in the budget as a line item. It's just IT. And then cyber is just going to fall under it, right? Now, this small, medium-sized businesses. So, I'm not talking about Raytheon here, right? But what's going to happen is that, of course, all of this will come up to the executive offices. And all of a sudden, the CEO now is going to become aware of the importance of cybersecurity. And that's the goal. That's what's important. So from my perspective, generally speaking, the biggest gap is, in fact, in the entire strategy of the business does not include cybersecurity. That's the biggest gap. And what CMMC is going to do, hopefully long term, is that it's going to change the culture of the DIB, and maybe as other government departments adopt CMMC, and maybe even local and state governments, then the culture of this country, so that CMMC becomes a line item at legal, at finance, at sales, and at IT and cybersecurity, as well as, of course, at the exec offices.
Yeah, you just highlighted a key point. Businesses are in it to make money, and if you can't generate revenue, then you have to you got options, right? Either spend money to be able to get that revenue, and basically spend money to get yourself CMMC compliant, or you're going to have to, unfortunately, find another line of business to get into, because they're going to draw a line in the sand, and it's going to come down to, if you want to be awarded the contract, you're going to need the appropriate level. So I think you highlight a key point of this is forcing companies to spend money on something that is important to protect their own IP, and to make sure that the warfighter has a technological advantage over our opponents, over the bad guys that we're on the battfield with.
I mean,
so that's the key.
Yeah, I deal with P&L statements all the time. That's how I look at how my companies are doing. My CEOs will send me their P&L statement, their balance sheet, right? Cybersecurity is not normally a line item in the P&L statement. It could be under IT, or it could be, buried as a sub-line item, but not a main line item. What I have a feeling is going to happen is that, along with, office expenses and technology expenses and legal expenses, which are, the high-level line items, cybersecurity might get its own high-level line item now, because the main gap is the fact that executive leadership, CEO on down, and even the board of an organization, do not have cybersecurity as a high enough priority until now. That's the major gap, and that's hopefully going to change.